Hi, I've had an email from Julie and she wants to know about the poem that I wrote called The Son of an Englishman. So this is for Julie and all her friends studying that poem. Julie asks if the poem was based on views of refugees, and I'd have to say, Julie, that the poem is based really and speaks from the voice of an Australian-born son of migrants or refugees. It's a fictitious character, and the three verses really talk about racism, and they talk about racism on three different levels. The first level is the sort of working class response to people of different ethnic background to the Anglo-Australian background, and you find amongst working class people their response to racism is quite out there, forward. They'll call a wog, and suffer the consequences. And so that verse about if I was a son of an Englishman, I'd really be true blue. I could drink myself to delirium and glorify the spew. I could desecrate the countryside and destroy the kangaroo. If I was a son of an Englishman, I'd really be true blue. That's the verse that refers to. The other verse, the other level I'm talking about is racism at a middle class level. When I was a kid, we moved from a very migrant, highly populated Greek area and moved to middle class English, mainly Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Australian area of Kew. And the racism that I found there myself was more silent racism, where people ignored you or overlooked you or apologised when they spoke about wogs or dagos and said, "Oh, we don't mean you," that sort of thing. It's a very isolated suburban life. You build four walls around you and never give a damn. That's that verse. The other verse, the third verse, really speaks about racism at an institutional level, where people with non-Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Australian background, I felt at that stage when I wrote it in the early 1980s, that migrant people, refugee people, were not given the same opportunities to succeed in top positions in Australia. And so I'd really be an Aussie. I could be a High Court judge or an actor on the telly. I could even be Prime Minister or a co-star with Skippy. They're all the highest level of achievement in their fields. And I believed at that stage that those highest levels of achievement weren't available to people of non-Anglo-Australian background, like myself. My mother, she wears black. Now, what does that refer to? In the Greek culture, culture that continue to live and practice their religion in Australia, they go into mourning. Women in particular have to wear black, and the mourning period can be for 1, 2, 3 years, forever for some people. My auntie, when her husband died, she was only 55 or something, but she wore black for the rest of her life. My mother, when my father died, wore black for 2 years. So my mother, she wears black. Okay, it separates out. So I'm different, I'm different to an Anglo-Australian. My father eats salami. My mother, she wears black. My last name's Papadopoulos. My first name's just plain Jack. But you see, even with that, I've made the concession that I've changed my name, which in the last line it says, but my real name, my name's really Komninos, that during my life I've had to make concessions to certain racisms, and I felt that changing my name, because for a long time at school and early years of work my name was Kevin, which my parents gave me when I went to school, but my real name is Komninos. So I thought at some stage when I changed it back to Komninos that I had been I'd changed my name to suit people who weren't really trying to know who I was or remember who I was. I got to a point in my life when I realised that you can be Australian and you can be of Greek background or any other cultural background and still be Australian. And you didn't have to sort of spell it out for people, whether you were an Anglo-Australian or a Greek Australian or a Indo-Chinese Australian or Islamic Australian or Muslim Australian or Indian Australian or Hindu Australian or whatever kind of Australian. This is a multicultural country. It's made up of people from many different countries. It's made up largely of refugees from other countries and other wars. My grandfather on my mother's side came to Australia in 1908, and he was a refugee from poverty. He came as a 12-year-old, and he came to Australia to work, to earn money to send back to his country to support his mother and father and brothers and sisters. And then finally in 1920 he brought them all out to Australia after the end of the First World War. So his family were all First World War refugees. My grandmother used to complain about the journey she took by boat. It wasn't a small boat, it was a ship, but in 1920 there was no refrigeration and they were third-class passengers and they were living on the same level. They were travelling on the same level as the livestock because there was no refrigeration. They had to take all the live animals with them to slaughter along the way to feed people on this 6-week journey from Greece to Australia. My father came in 1935 for the same reason. 15-year-old, had 9 brothers and sisters and a mother back in Greece, and worked here in an uncle's cafe to support them until he finally, till they became refugees, and the island was bombed and their homes were destroyed and they were evacuated to Egypt. And from Egypt, where they were in refugee camps, my father sponsored them to come to Australia in 1948. So although I'm not a refugee, I'm from a refugee family, and I suppose if you ask most Australians, even Anglo-Australians, they can tell you that they're refugee stories too. So I hope I have I've answered your questions, and hope you find this helpful, and hope you enjoy the poetry.